where the secrets of the heart are written with ink and sealed with scandal. Welcome to channel, The Countess Chronicles.
You've been lied to about love. Seriously, everything you've been told, that healing takes time, that you need to work on yourself before you're ready for someone new, that broken people can't have healthy relationships. It's all garbage. Want to know the real secret nobody talks about? The people who are the hardest to love are often the ones who love the deepest once they finally let someone in. That Duke everyone called cold and heartless? He wasn't broken beyond repair. He was just waiting for someone brave enough to see past the mask. And here's the controversial part that's gonna make some people angry. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone who's been hurt is absolutely nothing. No fixing, no saving, no grand gestures. Just being there, consistently and quietly, while they figure out their own path back to wholeness. Sounds crazy, right? We've been taught that love means fighting for someone, chasing them, proving ourselves worthy. But what if I told you the most powerful thing you can do is simply exist in someone's orbit, without demands, without expectations, without turning their healing into your personal mission? Here's what nobody wants to admit, but everyone knows deep down. We're all terrified of the same thing. Not being alone, but being seen. Really seen, past all the performance and pretense and carefully curated versions of ourselves we present to the world. We build these elaborate walls, these systems of protection, convinced we're keeping ourselves safe from pain. But what we're actually doing? We're keeping ourselves safe from living, from feeling, from the kind of connection that makes you vulnerable, but also makes you fully alive. This Duke spent 3 years in a hidden prison of his own making, convinced his walls were protection when they were really just another form of suffering. And the woman who changed everything? She didn't have some secret strategy or manipulative technique. She just had the audacity to be genuine in a world full of performance, to be calm in a world of desperation, to offer space instead of pressure. And that changed everything in ways neither of them expected. You're watching this video for a reason. Maybe you're the one who's been hurt and built walls so high nobody can climb them anymore. Maybe you're the one trying to reach someone who seems unreachable, wondering if you should keep trying or just give up. Or maybe you're just tired. Tired of shallow connections, tired of games, tired of wondering why real love seems so impossibly difficult when it's supposed to be natural. Whatever brought you here, I need you to stay for the next 35 minutes, because what I'm about to share will completely change how you think about love, healing, and the space between brokenness and wholeness. This isn't some fairy tale where everything magically works out because two pretty people fall in love. This is the real story of how two scared, imperfect people chose courage over comfort. How they faced their demons together instead of pretending those demons didn't exist. How they built something lasting not despite their flaws, but because they were honest about them. The Duke's story starts 3 years before he ever met Lady Emma, on what should have been the happiest day of his life. Picture it: the cathedral filled with flowers and nobility, hundreds of guests waiting in their finest clothes, the Archbishop ready to perform the ceremony that would unite two powerful families. And the bride? She never showed up. Just didn't come. Left him standing at that altar in front of everyone who mattered in their world, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute, until someone finally had the courage to say what everyone already knew. She wasn't coming. She'd run away with someone else, left a letter full of apologies and excuses, destroyed him publicly in the cruelest way imaginable. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt. It rewrites your entire understanding of trust, love, vulnerability. It turns you into someone you never wanted to be. And that's where our story really begins, in the ashes of who he used to be and the fortress he built from those ashes. But here's the mystery everyone's been trying to solve. How did one gentle woman succeed where hundreds of others failed? How did she reach a heart that seemed permanently closed? And more importantly, what can you learn from her approach that might change everything about how you connect with others? Before we talk about her, you've got to understand him. Because nobody's born cold, right? Nobody just wakes up one day and decides they're gonna be emotionally unavailable for the rest of their lives. You know that person you've met who seems like they don't feel anything? The one who's tough, who doesn't get attached? Yeah, there's always a story behind that mask. Always a secret they're hiding, even from themselves. And this Duke? His story was written in silence, carved deep into his heart like some ancient enigma nobody dared to solve. See, 3 years before Emma walked into his life, he was a completely different man. Warm, open, ready to love without fear. But then Lady Victoria left him, and something inside him didn't just break. It shattered into 1,000 pieces that he swore he'd never let anyone touch again. I had a friend back in college who everyone called the Ice Queen. She never cried, never opened up, never really fell in love. Not the real kind, anyway. Everybody just assumed that's who she was, like being emotionally distant was her personality trait or something. But one night, at this party, after a few too many drinks, she finally told me the truth. When she was 15, she confessed her feelings to the boy she'd been crushing on for months, right there in front of the entire classroom. And you know what he did? He laughed. Loud. And then everyone else started laughing too, like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. She made a decision that day, standing there with tears she refused to let fall. She would never be vulnerable again. And she wasn't. For 7 whole years, she built walls so high that nobody could climb them. The Duke? Same thing. Except his pain was multiplied by 1,000. Wrapped in the vestiges of nobility and the weight of a title that demanded he never show weakness. Think of it like this. The Duke's heart was once like a crystal vase, you know? Delicate, precious, something you'd handle with care because it was so beautiful and fragile. When Lady Victoria abandoned him at the altar, that vase didn't just crack, it absolutely shattered. And what did he do? He gathered all those broken pieces, melted them down, and forged them into bulletproof glass. You can still see through it, sure, but you'll never touch what's inside again. And here's the real tragedy hidden beneath all that protective armor. He thought he was keeping himself safe. He genuinely believed that by locking his heart away in this hidden fortress of his own making, he was winning some kind of battle against pain. But the truth? He wasn't protecting himself. He was imprisoning himself. Every day he wore that mask, every moment he pretended not to care, he was losing pieces of who he used to be, and nobody around him could decipher the codes of his suffering. In the 3 years after the disappearance of Lady Victoria from his life, the Duke transformed into someone almost unrecognizable. He became the man who'd show up 2 hours late to balls, simply because he knew everyone would be waiting, and he liked having that power. He'd dance exactly 1 song with each eligible lady, and never ever ask for a second. Couldn't risk anyone thinking they were special to him, right? His conversations were all surface-level stuff. Politics, business deals, the fastest horses in the county, anything except himself. Everyone respected him, feared him even, but nobody actually knew him. And you want to know the most messed up part? He was comfortable living like that, Because when you've been hurt as badly as he had, you start to realize something dark. Nothing is safer than feeling nothing. The void doesn't betray you, doesn't leave you standing at an altar wondering what you did wrong. He'd rather live in that cold silence than risk the conflict of opening up again. I've been there myself, honestly. After getting out of a toxic relationship that lasted 4 years, 4 years of my life I'll never get back, I made a decision. I told myself, that's it, I'm done, I'm never falling in love again. And I meant it. I'd go out with people, sure, have fun, keep it light. But I always maintained this distance, you know? Like there was an invisible wall between me and anyone who tried to get close. People thought I was independent, focused on myself, living my best life. But that was all a lie. A conspiracy I'd convinced even myself was true. The truth? I was absolutely terrified. Terrified of being vulnerable, of trusting someone with my heart again, of ending up broken one more time. The Duke was exactly like that. Only difference was, nobody saw his fear because it was hidden behind power and privilege and that title that commanded respect. They just saw the cold, and they assumed that's all there was. But underneath, pure, unfiltered terror of feeling anything real again. So when Lady Emma Carlisle entered his life, when she walked into that dinner party without any agenda, without any plan to capture his attention or win his affections, she wasn't just facing a difficult man. She was facing a man who was absolutely petrified of letting himself feel again. A man who'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of emotional detachment, who'd turned his heart into a forbidden zone that nobody was allowed to enter. See? Most people looked at the Duke and saw arrogance, saw someone who thought he was too good for love or companionship. But that wasn't it at all. It was fear. Raw, primal fear, dressed up in expensive clothes and a noble title. He wasn't avoiding love because he didn't want it. He was avoiding it because he wanted it so desperately that the thought of losing it again, of living through that revelation of betrayal one more time, was more than he could bear. That's what 3 years of protecting yourself looks like. It turns into a prison you can't escape from. And here's where the whole mystery of their story begins to unfold in ways nobody expected. Lady Emma didn't walk into his world with some master plan to heal him, to be his savior, to show him that love was worth risking everything for. Nope. She wasn't trying to decode the enigma of his cold heart or solve the puzzle of why the most eligible duke in England refused to let anyone close. She was just herself. Genuine, authentic, living her life without any ulterior motives. And maybe that's exactly why what happened next was so powerful, so different from every other woman who'd tried and failed to capture his attention. Because she wasn't trying to capture anything. She wasn't hunting for his affection like it was some prize to be won. She was simply existing in the same spaces he occupied, bringing her own light without demanding he step into it. That kind of authentic presence? That's rare. That's what makes someone stop and actually pay attention. So when she walked into that dinner at his sister's house, carrying no expectations and wearing no disguise, she became something he hadn't encountered in 3 years. A mystery he actually wanted to solve. Not because she was playing hard to get. She genuinely wasn't playing any game at all. But because her indifference was real. She didn't need him, didn't need his title, his wealth, his approval, or his attention. And for a man who'd spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him, that was like breathing fresh air after being stuck in a room full of smoke. It made him curious in ways he'd forgotten he could be. It made him want to know more, to understand what made her different, to figure out why this one woman seemed completely unaffected by his presence. And that curiosity? That was the first crack in his bulletproof glass. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, the trace of who he used to be was still alive somewhere deep inside. Lady Emma Carlisle wasn't anything he expected. Actually, she wasn't even trying to win him over, and maybe that's exactly why it worked. See, there's this thing about human nature that's kind of funny when you think about it. The moment you stop chasing something, that's when it starts chasing you. Emma wasn't playing games or using some secret strategy she'd read about in those romance novels ladies whispered about at tea parties. She was just living her life, completely unbothered by the fact that the most sought-after duke in England was in the same room. And that was the enigma he couldn't solve, because every other woman spent their entire evening trying to catch his eye, angling for an introduction, laughing a little too loud at things that weren't even funny. But Emma? She didn't even glance his way. Not once. And for a man who'd spent 3 years being hunted, that silence was deafening. You ever notice how cats work? If you chase them around, calling their name, trying to pet them, they run away like you're the plague. But if you just sit down on the couch, mind your own business, read a book or whatever, they come right up to you, all curious and ready for attention. All those other women were the person chasing the cat with treats, making those weird kissing noises people make. Emma was the one sitting on the couch, not even aware the cat existed. And guess who sparked his curiosity? The thing is, when you're desperate for something, people can smell it on you like cheap perfume. But when you're genuinely content with or without it, that's when people start wondering what you've got that makes you so self-sufficient. Emma had that quality. She didn't need validation from anyone. And in a world where everyone wanted something from the Duke, that made her the biggest mystery of all. The first time they actually met was at a dinner party hosted by the Duke's sister, Lady Margaret. Emma was there because she was close friends with Margaret. No ulterior motives, no master plan, just a simple friendship invitation. When Margaret introduced them, you know what Emma did? Nothing dramatic. She performed a polite curtsy, said, "It's a pleasure, Your Grace," in that soft voice of hers, and then went right back to her conversation with someone else. Didn't stare at him with those hopeful eyes. Didn't try to extend the interaction with some clever comment about the weather or compliment about his estate. She just acknowledged him and moved on, like he was any other guest at the party. And for the first time in 3 years, someone hadn't tried to impress him. That simple act of indifference, or maybe it was just genuine comfort in her own skin, planted a seed of curiosity in his mind. Who was this woman who didn't care about his title, his wealth, or the forbidden challenge of cracking through his cold exterior? I remember when I met my current boyfriend. I was in this phase of, I don't want anything serious, and he was too. We were both just focused on our own lives, doing our thing. We met at a birthday party, talked for maybe 10 minutes about some random topic, and I thought he was interesting enough. But then I just left. Didn't ask for his Instagram, didn't linger around hoping he'd ask for my number, didn't do that thing where you keep walking past someone hoping they'll stop you. I genuinely had other places to be, and other things on my mind. He told me later that it messed with his head in the best way, because for the first time, a woman wasn't trying to lock him down or secure his attention. And that made him want to pursue me instead. Lady Emma did the exact same thing, except she wasn't even aware she was doing it. She wasn't playing hard to get. She just genuinely had her own life, her own interests, her own world that existed completely independent of whether the Duke noticed her or not. During that dinner, the Duke did what he always did. Observed from a distance, never really participating, always maintaining that careful emotional distance. But he couldn't help noticing things about Emma that set her apart from every other woman in that room. She laughed in this genuine way, you know? Not that performative laugh society ladies used when they wanted to appear charming. When something was funny, she laughed. When it wasn't, she smiled politely and moved on. She asked people real questions too, seemed genuinely interested in their answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. When someone shared a story, she actually listened, like really listened, instead of planning what clever thing she'd say next. And she had her own opinions about things, shared them when asked, but never forced them on anyone or got defensive when people disagreed. Most importantly, she didn't look at him even once with those calculating eyes that said, "You need to notice me." There was no desperation, no agenda, no secret hope written across her face. It was refreshing in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Think about it like this. You ever been on the subway or train and noticed someone completely absorbed in a book? They're in their own world, turning pages, maybe smiling at something they read, totally unaware of everyone around them. You get curious about that book, about that person, about what's capturing their attention so completely. But if someone's sitting there staring at you, trying to make eye contact, clearly wanting your attention, you look away, right? You avoid that whole situation. Emma was the person with the book, lost in her own world. And the Duke? He was the passenger who couldn't stop wondering what she was reading, what made her smile like that, what existed in her world that made his presence so utterly irrelevant. That curiosity was dangerous for a man who'd spent 3 years not being curious about anything except how to avoid feeling. She'd cracked something open without even trying, left a trace of interest in a heart that had been locked away. 2 weeks later, another social event. Another evening where the Duke showed up out of obligation rather than desire. He saw her across the room, talking with a small group near the windows. And for the first time in 3 years, he actually wanted to talk to someone. Not because he had to, not because it was politically advantageous, but because he was genuinely curious. He made his way over, waited for a natural pause in the conversation, and mentioned something about a book he'd overheard her discussing. She turned, recognized him, and responded with that same gentle politeness. No exaggeration, no fake enthusiasm, just a normal conversation between two people who happened to share an interest in literature. They talked for maybe 5 minutes about the book, about the author's other works, about whether the ending was satisfying or disappointing. And when the conversation naturally reached its conclusion, she didn't try to stretch it out with desperate small talk. She just smiled and said, "It was nice talking with you, Your Grace. Have a lovely evening." And then she walked away, just like that. Left him standing there wanting more, wondering why this one woman seemed so completely unbothered by the codes of courtship that governed everyone else's behavior. What did Emma do that all the others failed to do? Simple. She didn't treat him like a prize to be won at the county fair. She treated him like a human being, like someone whose company was pleasant, but not necessary for her happiness or validation. She wasn't trying to impress him with accomplishments or beauty or wit. She was just herself, authentic, genuine, comfortable in her own skin. And you know what's ironic? The best strategy for capturing someone's attention is to not have a strategy at all. It's to be so genuinely content with who you are that you don't need anyone else to complete you. That's what draws people in, not the chase, not the game, but the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth without needing constant confirmation. The Duke had been surrounded by conspiracy and calculation for 3 years, everyone trying to crack the enigma of his heart with elaborate plans. Emma didn't have a plan. She just existed. And somehow, That was more powerful than anything anyone else had tried. So they started running into each other more often. Not planned encounters, not those coincidental meetings that society ladies orchestrated with military precision. Just life happening, you know? Same social circles, same events, same world getting smaller and smaller until avoiding each other would have taken more effort than just being in the same room. And each conversation was like a single drop of warm water falling on ice. One drop doesn't do anything, right? But drop after drop, day after day, something starts to shift. The ice doesn't crack all at once. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. But if you pay attention, you can hear it. That quiet sound of something frozen finally beginning to thaw. The Duke wasn't even aware it was happening at first. He just knew that rooms felt emptier when she wasn't in them, that conversations felt duller when she wasn't part of them, that somehow this woman had become the secret reason he actually showed up to things instead of sending regrets. When I finally allowed myself to open up to my boyfriend, it wasn't some dramatic moment where I suddenly trusted him completely. It was gradual, like learning to walk after an injury. First, I told him something small, something that didn't matter too much. He didn't judge, didn't use it against me, didn't make me feel stupid for sharing. So I told him something else, and he listened, really listened, without trying to fix me or change my mind about how I felt. Then I shared something a little more personal, and he held that information like it was precious, never throwing it back in my face during arguments or using my vulnerabilities as weapons. Each time he proved trustworthy, another brick came out of my wall, until one day I realized I'd told him everything. All my fears, all my insecurities, all the hidden parts of myself I thought nobody would accept. And I wasn't scared anymore. The Duke went through the exact same process with Emma. She didn't break down his door demanding entry. He opened it himself, slowly, carefully, one lock at a time. I'm going to tell you about 3 specific moments that changed everything. Because love isn't one big moment. It's 100 tiny ones that add up to something extraordinary. These moments weren't dramatic, wouldn't make good scenes in a romance novel, probably. But they were real, and real is always more powerful than dramatic. The first moment happened about a month after they started these casual encounters. There was this gathering at a mutual friend's estate, one of those all-day affairs with lunch and games and endless socializing that made the Duke want to escape to literally anywhere else. He'd been making polite conversation for hours, wearing that mask he'd perfected, charming but distant, present but unavailable. Then he saw her slip away from the crowd, heading toward the library with a book tucked under her arm. And without thinking about it, without planning it, he followed. Not to talk necessarily, just to be near that calmness she carried around like it was the most natural thing in the world. He found her in the library, curled up in a chair near the window where the afternoon light poured in. She looked up when he entered, gave him that soft smile of hers, and then went right back to reading. Didn't ask why he was there, didn't try to make conversation, didn't do that thing people do where they perform their personality hoping you'll be impressed. She just read. And he stood there for a moment, awkward in a way he hadn't felt since he was a teenager, before finally grabbing a random book off the shelf and settling into a chair across from her. They sat like that for 10 minutes. Complete silence, except for the sound of pages turning and birds outside the window. It should have been uncomfortable. 2 people alone in a room, not talking, barely acknowledging each other. But it wasn't. It was the most comfortable he'd felt in 3 years. Like he could just exist without performing, without being the Duke, without wearing all those layers of protection. After those 10 minutes, she closed her book, marked her page, and looked at him with those genuinely curious eyes. "What are you reading?" she asked. And they talked for an hour about books, about ideas, about philosophy and stories, and the way certain authors could capture something true about being human. Imagine wearing a mask all day, every day. Heavy, tight, suffocating. You get so used to it that you forget what your actual face feels like underneath. But then someone comes along and says, "You can take that off here. You're safe." At first, you don't even want to. The mask feels safer than being exposed, vulnerable, seen. But you take it off for just a minute, just to see what happens. And you breathe. Actually breathe, for the first time in forever. That feeling. It's addictive in the best way. Emma was the only place the Duke could take off his mask, the only person around whom he didn't have to be the cold, untouchable nobleman everyone expected. In that library, talking about books and ideas, he wasn't performing a role. He was just a man having a conversation with a woman who genuinely interested him. And that was the first real crack in the ice, the moment he remembered what it felt like to be himself instead of the character he'd been playing. The second moment happened during a horseback ride. Emma rode well, not showing off, just genuinely skilled and comfortable on horseback, which impressed him more than he wanted to admit. They'd gone out with a group, but somehow ended up separated from the others, following a trail that led to a small lake surrounded by trees. He stopped his horse near the water's edge, and she stopped beside him, both of them just looking at the stillness of the lake, the way it reflected the sky perfectly. He stood there in silence for so long she probably thought he'd forgotten she existed. But then, almost like the words escaped before he could stop them, he said quietly, "She promised she loved me." Emma didn't rush to respond, didn't fill the silence with empty reassurances. She just waited, giving him space to continue if he wanted to. And he did. "I believed her. I was a fool." His voice was bitter, filled with all the self-loathing he'd been carrying for 3 years. This was the moment most people would have tried to fix, would have jumped in with, "You weren't a fool," or "She didn't deserve you," or some other platitude that meant nothing. But Emma didn't do that. She looked at him with those understanding eyes and said something that cut through all his defenses. Believing isn't foolishness. It's courage. And I admire that. She didn't try to minimize his pain or rewrite his story. She honored it, acknowledged it, and then showed him how the thing he saw as weakness, his capacity to trust, to love, to believe, was actually his greatest strength. He turned to look at her then, really look at her, and something fundamental shifted in his chest. Because for the first time since Lady Victoria's disappearance from his life, someone had seen him. Not the Duke, not the title, not the wealth or power or social standing. Just him, the man underneath all of that, scared and hurt and trying so hard to pretend he was fine. Emma saw through the conspiracy he'd built around himself, saw the real person he'd hidden away, and she didn't run. She didn't try to fix him or change him. She just saw him and stayed. And that was the second crack. Wider, deeper, more dangerous than the first. There's this moment in any real connection where you feel it. This person sees you. Not the version you present to the world, not the carefully curated image you've spent years perfecting. They see the real you, all the messy, complicated, imperfect parts you keep hidden. I'll never forget when my boyfriend said to me, "I see you trying to be strong all the time, but you don't need to be strong with me. You can just be." I cried, actually cried, right there, because nobody had ever given me permission to stop performing strength, to just exist in whatever emotional state I was in without judgment. The Duke felt the same thing with Emma in that moment by the lake. She'd seen past his carefully constructed walls, past the bitter exterior he showed the world, and instead of being disappointed by what she found, she admired it. She saw his vulnerability not as weakness, but as proof that he'd once been brave enough to love completely. And that revelation, that he could be fully seen and still be valued, changed something in him he didn't even know was still alive. The third moment was really a series of moments, a pattern that emerged over the next few weeks. See, the Duke started testing her. Not consciously at first, but he did it anyway because that's what hurt people do. They push, they test, they create situations to see if you'll leave like everyone else did. He'd show up late to things they'd planned. He'd be moody, withdrawn, giving short answers, and refusing to engage. He'd say something cutting, something designed to push her away before she could hurt him. Every other woman before her would have either given up entirely or become clingy, trying desperately to fix whatever was wrong, to win back his attention through elaborate gestures and emotional manipulation. But Emma? She didn't play that game. When he was cold, she didn't become desperate for his warmth. She just gave him space, respected his need for distance without making it about her. When he was rude, she didn't match his energy or fall apart crying. She'd just raise an eyebrow, sometimes call him out calmly. That was unkind. And then move the conversation elsewhere, like she wasn't going to waste energy on his bad behavior. She wasn't trying to change him or fix whatever was broken inside him. She was just showing him, through her actions, that she had boundaries too. She'd be there. She'd be patient. She'd be understanding. But she wouldn't accept being treated poorly. And she did it all without drama, without ultimatums, without making him feel like he was this terrible person who needed to grovel for forgiveness. It was matter of fact, like, I care about you, but I also care about myself, and those two things can coexist. You know how rescued dogs behave? They've been hurt, abandoned, maybe even abused. So when someone new tries to help them, they bite, they growl. They test every single boundary to see if this person will hurt them too. The wrong person tries to force affection, gets frustrated when the dog doesn't immediately trust them. But the right person? They give space. They stay present without being invasive. They prove, through consistency and patience, that they're safe. Emma was exactly that kind of person for the Duke. Present, but not pushy. Patient, but not a doormat. Understanding, but not enabling his worst behaviors. It was gradual, almost imperceptible. But one day, the Duke woke up and realized something that terrified him. He looked for her at every event, before he even looked for his own friends. He saved up stories and observations throughout his day, just to share them with her later. He laughed more when she was around. Actual, genuine laughter, not that polite chuckle he'd perfected for society. He felt lighter, like someone had removed weights he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten they were there. And most damning of all, he missed her when she wasn't around. Actually missed her presence, her voice, that calm energy she brought into every room. The silence that had once felt safe now felt empty. The walls he'd built to protect himself now felt like a prison keeping out the one person he actually wanted to let in. And that realization? It absolutely terrified him. Because recognizing you care about someone, admitting you've developed feelings, opens you up to the one thing he'd sworn never to experience again: the potential for devastating loss and the mystery of whether this time would be different. You know that moment in a relationship where everything's going really well and then someone just panics? Like things are getting too real, too serious, too close to actual commitment, and your brain screams, "Abort mission?" Yeah, that's exactly what happened. See, falling in love isn't the hard part. Staying there when it gets scary, that's where most people bail. The Duke had spent months letting Emma in, piece by piece, brick by brick, until suddenly he looked around and realized she was everywhere. In his thoughts, in his daily routine, in the way he saw the world. And that scared him more than anything he'd faced in 3 years. Because caring about someone again meant risking everything again. It meant handing someone the power to destroy him, and he'd already been destroyed once. So he did what every terrified person does when love gets too real. He ran. Not physically, but emotionally. Which is sometimes even worse, because at least when someone leaves, you can see them go. This was watching someone disappear right in front of you while they're still standing there. After that conversation by the lake, after he'd opened up about Lady Victoria and Emma had seen straight into his soul, the Duke just vanished. Not literally, but he stopped showing up to places he knew she'd be. Started declining invitations to events where their paths would cross. Made excuses, suddenly had urgent business to attend to, became conveniently unavailable every single time there was a possibility of seeing her. He went right back to being that cold, distant man everyone had known before Emma walked into his life. Maybe even colder, because now he was fighting against something instead of just existing in numbness. And Emma? She felt it. Of course she did. You can't spend months building a connection with someone and not notice when they suddenly treat you like a stranger. When the warmth you'd come to rely on turns to ice overnight. But here's what separated her from every other woman who'd ever tried to hold on to him. She didn't chase. Didn't send desperate letters asking what she'd done wrong. Didn't corner mutual friends demanding explanations. She just let him go. Kept living her life like he was a chapter that had ended naturally, even though inside she was probably breaking into 1,000 pieces. I've been exactly where Emma was. I was seeing this guy, everything was going great. We were connecting on this deep level I hadn't experienced before. And then, suddenly, he got distant. Stopped texting as much, canceled plans, gave me those one-word answers that feel like doors slamming in your face. My first instinct? Panic. Send a dozen messages asking if everything was okay, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, attempting to fix whatever had broken. But then, my best friend told me something that literally changed my entire approach to relationships. She said, if he wants to stay, he'll stay. If he wants to go, let him. But don't shrink yourself by chasing someone who's running away. So I stopped. Stopped texting first. Stopped trying to manufacture reasons to see him. Stopped obsessing over what went wrong. I focused on myself, on my life, on the things that made me happy outside of him. And you know what happened? A week later, he came back. Apologized. Said, I missed you. I was scared and I'm sorry. Emma did the exact same thing. And it worked for the same reason. Because desperation pushes people away, but self-respect? That makes them reconsider everything. Think about trying to hold sand in your hand. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers, right? But if you keep your hand open, palm flat, the sand just sits there peacefully. Every woman before Emma had tried to squeeze, to hold on tighter when the Duke pulled away, to prove their worth through persistence and emotional labor. Emma kept her hand open. She wasn't playing games or using reverse psychology. She genuinely believed that if someone wanted to leave her life, she wouldn't beg them to stay. She had too much respect for herself, and, honestly, too much respect for him. Because what's the point of keeping someone who doesn't want to be kept? What kind of relationship can you build on guilt and obligation instead of genuine choice? So she went to social events, smiled at acquaintances, had conversations that had nothing to do with him. She read her books, visited friends, lived a full life that existed completely separate from whether or not the Duke was in it. And that open hand? It made all the difference in ways neither of them expected. During those 3 weeks of self-imposed exile, the Duke was absolutely miserable. He tried to convince himself he didn't feel anything, that Emma had just been a pleasant distraction and nothing more. Told himself he was relieved to have his uncomplicated life back, where nobody expected vulnerability or emotional availability. But his brain wouldn't cooperate with the lie. He'd catch himself comparing every woman he met to Emma, the way they laughed, not as genuine, the way they listened, not as attentively, the way they existed in the world, not as authentically. He'd hear something interesting and think, Emma would love this, then remember he'd chosen to cut her out of his life. Sleep became difficult because his dreams were full of her. Her smile, her voice, that way she had of looking at him like she could see past every defense he'd ever built. He was irritable with everyone, snapping at servants for minor mistakes, finding fault with everything around him. Because that's what happens when you're running from the one thing you actually want. You become impossible to please, impossible to satisfy, because the thing you need is the thing you're actively avoiding. The secret? He wouldn't admit, even to himself? He was terrified that what he felt for Emma was real, deeper than anything he'd felt even for Lady Victoria. The breaking point came at a grand ball during the height of the social season. He'd gone because his position demanded it, because a duke doesn't hide from society no matter how much he wants to. He spent the evening doing what he always did, performing the role, dancing the obligatory dances, making the expected small talk, counting the minutes until he could escape this elaborate prison of social expectations. And then he saw her, across the ballroom, standing near the windows where the moonlight made her dress shimmer like starlight. She was laughing at something a young earl was saying, her whole face lit up with genuine amusement, looking absolutely radiant. Beautiful, carefree, happy, everything good in a world that had felt gray for 3 weeks. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years, something he thought he'd successfully killed off: jealousy. Not the toxic, possessive kind that tries to control another person, but that aching jealousy that whispers, "I want to be the reason she smiles like that." The jealousy that comes from realizing you've pushed away something precious, and now someone else might claim the space you abandoned. It hit him like a physical blow. What the hell was he doing? There was this moment in my life where I had to make a choice that would define everything that came after. I'd been hurt before, had every logical reason to protect myself, to stay safe behind walls that had served me well for years. On paper, staying guarded made perfect sense. But then I asked myself a question that changed everything. What's worse, trying and maybe getting hurt, or not trying and definitely living with regret? Because at least if you try and fail, you know. You can say you were brave, you took the risk, you gave it everything you had. But if you never try, you spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? That haunts you in ways failure never could. I chose to try, chose to risk the pain because the alternative, a lifetime of wondering, was unbearable. The Duke stood at that exact crossroads, watching Emma laugh with another man, feeling his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. And he had to decide, would he choose fear and safety? Or would he choose the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe this time love wouldn't end in disappearance and betrayal? He moved before he could talk himself out of it, crossing the ballroom with purpose while everyone watched, because people always watched when the Duke did anything. The crowd parted like water, conversations pausing mid-sentence as he walked past. He stopped directly in front of Emma, and the young earl she'd been talking to recognized the look on the Duke's face. Possession mixed with desperation, and excused himself with a quick bow. Smart man. Emma looked up at him, and there was no anger in her eyes, no wounded pride or bitter resentment. Just that calm, patient acceptance she always carried, like she'd known he'd eventually come back, or she'd be perfectly fine if he didn't. That lack of desperation, that complete absence of neediness, it made him want her even more. He extended his hand, formal and proper despite the chaos raging inside him. "May I have this dance?" His voice came out rougher than intended, betraying the emotion he was trying so hard to control. She looked at his hand for a long moment, and he genuinely didn't know if she'd take it or politely decline and walk away. Then she smiled, soft, gentle, real, and placed her hand in his. Of course, they moved to the dance floor, and suddenly the room full of people disappeared. 200 guests watched them waltz, but for the Duke and Emma, there was only the music, only the feeling of her hand in his, only the way their bodies moved in perfect synchronization, like they'd been dancing together for years. He didn't speak at first, couldn't find words adequate for what he needed to say. How do you apologize for running away from the best thing that's ever happened to you? How do you explain that you hurt someone because you were terrified of being hurt yourself? The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of everything unsaid, every emotion too big for words. Finally, halfway through the dance, he leaned in close enough that only she could hear. His breath warm against her ear, he whispered the truth he'd been running from. "I'm sorry. I was scared." Simple words, honest words, the kind of vulnerability he'd sworn never to show anyone again. She didn't respond immediately, but he felt her hand tighten slightly around his, a small gesture that said more than paragraphs of reassurance could. When the music ended and they stepped off the dance floor, away from the watching eyes and whispered gossip, she finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying a truth that matched his own. "I'm scared too, but I'm here anyway." And that's when he knew. This wasn't like before. Emma wasn't Lady Victoria, wasn't someone who'd make promises she didn't mean or commitments she wouldn't keep. She was afraid of the same things he was, carried her own scars and secret fears, but she'd chosen to show up anyway, to be vulnerable anyway, to risk her heart anyway. That's not naivety or foolishness, that's courage in its purest form. Standing in front of the possibility of pain and saying yes anyway because love, real love, is worth the risk. He looked at her standing there in the moonlight streaming through the ballroom windows, brave and beautiful and absolutely terrifying, in the best possible way, and something inside him finally let go. The ice didn't just crack, it shattered completely. All the walls he'd built, all the protection he'd hidden behind, all the codes and conspiracy he'd used to keep the world at a distance, gone. Melted away by one simple truth. She was worth the risk. Now, I need to be completely honest with you about something. This didn't turn into a perfect fairy tale overnight, because that's not how real love works, right? Love doesn't magically heal all your wounds the moment you find the right person. Love gives you a safe space to heal yourself, but the actual work? That's still yours to do. Emma wasn't some miracle cure that fixed 3 years of trauma just by existing in his life. She was the environment that made healing possible, the garden where he could finally plant new seeds. But he had to do the digging, the watering, the patient waiting for growth. And honestly, that's what makes this story real instead of just another fantasy. Because healing is messy and slow and frustrating, and it requires you to face things you've been hiding from. The Duke had spent 3 years building a hidden fortress around his heart, and tearing it down brick by brick was going to take time, effort, and a courage he wasn't sure he possessed. But, with Emma beside him, at least he wasn't doing it alone. After the ball, after that moment where he'd finally admitted his fear out loud, they began officially courting. And the Duke had to learn things he'd never properly learned before. Things that should have been simple, but felt impossibly difficult for someone who'd perfected the art of emotional unavailability. First lesson? Communication instead of withdrawal. See, before Emma, whenever something bothered him or triggered that old pain, he'd just shut down completely. Pull away. Go silent. Retreat into himself like a turtle hiding in its shell. He thought that was protecting himself, but really it was just prolonging the pain, letting it fester in the silence and grow into something bigger than it needed to be. Emma didn't let him get away with that. Not in a controlling way, but she'd notice when he started to withdraw, and she'd gently call him on it. "What are you feeling right now?" she'd ask, her voice soft but insistent. At first, he hated it. Would say nothing through gritted teeth, frustrated that she wouldn't just let him hide, but she'd wait. Wouldn't push or pry, just sit there patiently until he was ready. And eventually, slowly, he'd start talking, sharing the fear, the insecurity, the trace of old wounds that still hurt when pressed. I grew up in a house where we didn't talk about feelings, you know? If you were sad, you went to your room until you could put on a happy face. If you were angry, you swallowed it down until it turned into something cold and hard in your chest. Emotions were meant to be private, controlled, hidden away like some shameful secret nobody was supposed to acknowledge. So when I met my boyfriend and he actually wanted to know how I was feeling, really feeling, not just the socially acceptable version, it was incredibly uncomfortable. He'd see through my "I'm fine" and ask again, "No, really? What's going on?" And I'd want to scream at him to just let it go, to accept my lies and move on like everyone else in my life had. But he wouldn't. He'd wait with this patient, loving expression until I finally cracked and told him the truth. It was hard, so hard, because I had to unlearn 25 years of emotional suppression, had to rewrite the codes I'd been programmed with since childhood. But it was also the most liberating thing I've ever done. Today, I can say, I'm upset without feeling weak. The Duke went through that exact same process, learning that vulnerability wasn't the enemy. Silence was. Second lesson? Trust. And I don't mean trust in the abstract, philosophical sense. I mean practical, everyday trust that Emma wasn't going to disappear when things got difficult. There were times she had to travel to visit family in the countryside, gone for a week or more. Times she'd be at social events talking with other men. Friendly conversations, nothing inappropriate, but conversations nonetheless. Times when she had her own life, her own friends, her own interests that didn't include him. And every single time, his anxiety would start whispering those poisonous thoughts. What if she meets someone better? What if she realizes you're not worth the effort? What if she's planning her escape right now? The old him would have pushed her away first, ended things before she could leave him, protected himself through preemptive abandonment. But he was trying to be different, trying to break that pattern of self-sabotage. So instead, he'd sit with the discomfort, let himself feel the fear without acting on it. And then Emma would come back. Every single time. She'd return from her trip with stories to share and a smile on her face, clearly happy to see him. She'd finish her conversation with the attractive young lord and come right over to the Duke, choosing him without hesitation. She'd live her full, independent life and still make space for him in it. Each time she chose him, each time she came back, another layer of that old fear dissolved. Think of it like physical therapy after you break a bone. The doctor sets it, puts it in a cast, tells you it'll heal. But the cast doesn't do the healing. Your body does. The cast just holds everything in place, provides stability, while the real work happens underneath. Emma was the cast. She provided the stable, safe environment where the Duke's heart could finally start mending itself. She held things steady when he wanted to run, offered support when he felt like falling apart, protected the healing process from outside interference. But the actual healing? That was happening inside him, cell by cell, day by day, as he slowly learned to trust again. She couldn't force it, couldn't rush it, couldn't do it for him. All she could do was be there, consistently and patiently, while he did the hard internal work of putting himself back together. And that's what real love looks like. Not fixing someone, but holding space for them to fix themselves. Third lesson, and maybe the hardest one, being vulnerable on purpose. Not just accidentally letting his guard down, but actively choosing to be open even when everything in him screamed to hide. The real turning point came about 6 months into their courtship. They were sitting in the garden at his estate, one of those perfect summer evenings where the air smells like flowers and possibility. He'd been quiet for a while, wrestling with something he needed to say but couldn't quite force out. Finally, he just said it. Let the words tumble out before he could second-guess himself. I love you, and it terrifies me. Simple. Honest. Completely exposing every fear he'd been carrying. Emma could have responded with reassurance, could have said, "Don't be scared," or "Everything will be fine," or any of those empty platitudes people use to make discomfort go away. But she didn't. She looked at him with those clear eyes and said, "I know. It terrifies me too. But we're in this together." Because mature love isn't pretending problems don't exist. It's acknowledging, yes, this is scary. Yes, we might get hurt. Yes, there are no guarantees. And then choosing each other anyway. It's being honest about the risk while deciding the reward is worth it. The proposal happened 6 months after that conversation. A full year after the ball where everything changed. He took her back to the lake where he'd first really opened up to her, where she'd seen past all his defenses and chosen to stay anyway. It was just the two of them, golden hour sunlight making everything look like a painting. Complete silence except for birds and the gentle lap of water against the shore. He didn't do anything elaborate or showy, no audience of hundreds, no grand romantic gestures that would end up in society gossip columns. This was too important, too real, too much theirs to share with anyone else. He held her hand, looked into her eyes, and said something that was perfect, specifically because it wasn't perfect. I don't know if I'll be perfect. I'll probably mess this up sometimes, but I promise to try every single day. Will you marry me? Not asking if she'd accept him, but if she'd try with him. Acknowledging that marriage wasn't a destination but a journey, one they'd navigate together with all its mystery and unexpected turns. She laughed, that genuine, joyful sound he'd fallen in love with, and said, "I'll mess up too. I'm far from perfect. But yes, I'll try with you." Not a simple yes, a commitment to mutual effort, to growing together, to facing whatever came with honesty instead of fear. When my boyfriend asked me to be his girlfriend, officially, not just casually seeing each other, he didn't give me some romantic speech about how perfect I was. He said, "You annoy me sometimes. I'll definitely annoy you too. We're going to fight about stupid things and maybe some serious things, but I want to try. With you, specifically." And that was the most honest, beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. Because he wasn't selling me a fantasy where everything would be easy. He was offering me reality, messy, complicated, sometimes frustrating reality, and asking if I wanted to navigate it together. That's what the Duke offered Emma, and that's what she accepted. Not a promise of perfection, but a promise of effort. Not a guarantee of happiness, but a commitment to try for it together. And honestly, that's more valuable than any fairy tale ending where problems magically disappear because you found the one. Real love is finding someone whose problems you're willing to deal with, whose rough edges fit somehow with yours, whose imperfections you can accept because the whole package, flaws included, is worth it. People noticed the change in him immediately. The Duke, who'd been cold and unreachable for 3 years, suddenly seemed lighter. He smiled more, and not those polite society smiles, but real ones that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. He participated in conversations instead of just observing from the sidelines, actually engaging with people instead of performing the minimum required social interaction. He was patient with his servants, kind to strangers, generous with his time in ways he hadn't been since before Lady Victoria's betrayal. Most noticeably, he just seemed at peace, like he'd been carrying this enormous weight for years and had finally been given permission to set it down. But here's the thing everyone needs to understand. Emma didn't change him. She didn't fix him, didn't transform him into a different person, didn't perform some magical revelation that solved all his problems. What she did was create a safe space where he could choose to change himself, where he could slowly dismantle the walls he'd built, brick by careful brick, because he finally trusted that there was something worth protecting on the other side. She was the light, steady and constant. He was the plant that, given the right conditions, finally allowed himself to grow toward it. And the beautiful part? Emma changed too. She'd always been kind, but now she was more confident, more willing to take up space, more comfortable asserting her needs and boundaries, because she had someone who truly saw her, who valued her perspective, who chose her every single day, not because he needed her, but because he genuinely wanted her. When two people heal together, not one fixing the other, but both doing their own work side by side, it doesn't create codependency. It creates partnership. Two whole people choosing to build something together instead of two broken people trying to complete each other. That's the difference between toxic love that suffocates and healthy love that liberates. Between the conspiracy of manipulation and the honesty of genuine connection. Between the forbidden patterns that keep us stuck and the freedom that comes from facing our fears together. The Duke and Emma didn't just fall in love, they grew into it, cultivated it, tended it like the precious, fragile thing it was. And that's what made it last. So, here's the real question. What are you gonna do with all of this? Because you can watch this video, feel inspired for 20 minutes, and then go right back to the same patterns that have been keeping you stuck. Or you can actually apply what you just learned. And I'm not talking about some vague, "I'll think about it" kind of application. I mean real, tangible changes starting today. Right now. If you're the one who's built walls like the Duke did, ask yourself honestly, are those walls still protecting you? Or are they just keeping you lonely? Because there's a massive difference between healthy boundaries and a prison of your own making. When was the last time you let someone actually see you? Not the version you perform for the world, but the real, messy, imperfect you underneath all that armor? And if you're the one trying to reach someone like Emma did, here's your wake-up call. Stop trying so hard. Stop chasing, stop fixing, stop making their healing your personal project. Just be genuine, be consistent, be someone safe enough that they can choose to open up when they're ready. Not because you manipulated them into it, but because you created space for it. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. What secret are you keeping from the people closest to you? What fear are you carrying around like it's a badge of honor instead of a burden you could share? What would happen if you stopped pretending you had it all together and just admitted, "I'm scared," or "I'm hurt," or "I don't know what I'm doing"? Would the world actually end? Or would you discover, like the Duke did, that vulnerability isn't weakness? It's the only path to real connection. Think about the last time someone hurt you. Did you process it and move forward? Or did you just add another brick to your wall and call it learning from experience? Because here's the hard truth nobody wants to hear. You can't selectively numb emotions. When you close yourself off to pain, you also close yourself off to joy, to love, to all the good stuff that makes life worth living. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually just existing in this gray zone where nothing truly touches you anymore. Is that really living, or is it just a slow form of dying? And for those of you who think this is just some romantic story that doesn't apply to real life, wake up. This isn't about finding your perfect match or waiting for someone to save you from yourself. This is about understanding that healing is possible, but only if you're willing to do the work. Only if you're brave enough to face what you've been running from. The Duke could have stayed bitter forever, could have lived out his entire life behind those walls, and nobody would have blamed him for it. He had every reason to stay closed off. But he didn't. He chose differently. He chose the terrifying path of opening up again, of risking pain for the possibility of something real. And that choice, that singular moment of courage, changed his entire life. What choice are you making right now? What are you choosing every single day when you wake up and decide how you're going to show up in the world? Because whether you realize it or not, you're choosing. Staying the same is a choice. Building walls is a choice. Pushing people away is a choice. And all those choices are leading you somewhere. The question is, do you like where you're headed? Here's what I want you to do after this video ends. Don't just scroll to the next one and forget everything you heard. Take 5 minutes, just 5, and write down 3 things. First, what wall are you hiding behind, and what are you protecting? Second, what would happen if you let that wall down with one person you trust? Third, what's one small step you could take today toward being more genuine, more vulnerable, more real? Not some massive transformation, just one tiny step. Maybe it's texting someone and admitting you miss them. Maybe it's telling your partner, "I'm scared," instead of, "I'm fine." Maybe it's just looking in the mirror and acknowledging the truth you've been avoiding. Whatever it is, do it. Today. Because the Duke's story isn't special because he was a Duke or because Emma was some perfect woman. It's special because 2 regular, flawed, scared people decided that connection was worth the risk. And if they can do it, so can you. The only question is, will you? Or will you stay comfortable in your misery, convinced that walls are safer than bridges, that silence is better than honesty, that being alone is less painful than being vulnerable? Let me tell you what's going to happen if you don't change anything. 5 years from now, you'll still be in the exact same place emotionally. Maybe different circumstances, different people, different problems, but the same patterns, the same walls, the same fear dressed up in different outfits. You'll look back on this moment and think, "I wish I'd been braver back then." Or you can make today the day everything shifts. The day you stop letting old wounds dictate your future. The day you choose courage over comfort, vulnerability over safety, connection over isolation. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. You'll mess up, you'll get scared, you'll want to run back behind your walls 1,000 times. But each time you choose to stay open instead of closed, to reach out instead of pull away, to trust instead of fear, you're rewriting your story. You're becoming someone new, someone who isn't defined by what happened to them, but by how they chose to heal from it. So here's my challenge to you, and I want you to take this seriously. Find one person in your life, just one, and practice being real with them. Not perfect, not impressive, just real. Share something you've been keeping hidden. Admit a fear you've been carrying. Ask for help with something you've been struggling with alone. And then watch what happens. Watch how vulnerability creates connection in ways performance never could. Watch how honesty builds bridges that small talk never will. Watch how your willingness to be imperfect gives other people permission to be imperfect too. That's how healing spreads. That's how love grows. That's how we stop perpetuating these cycles of isolation and start building something better. The Duke learned this lesson, and it transformed his entire existence. Now it's your turn. What are you waiting for? Permission? You just got it. The perfect moment? This is it. Absolute certainty that it'll work out? That doesn't exist and never will. You jump anyway, or you stay stuck forever. Your choice. If this story resonated with you, if something I said hit you right in that place you've been trying to ignore, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Because we're just getting started with these deep dives into what makes relationships actually work, what keeps people stuck, and how to build the kind of connection you've been craving. This isn't your typical surface-level relationship advice. We're going into the real stuff, the uncomfortable truths, the patterns nobody wants to acknowledge, but everyone needs to understand. Next video, we're talking about why the people who claim they don't need anyone are usually the ones who need connection the most, and how that paradox keeps them trapped in cycles they don't even recognize. You won't want to miss it. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the algorithm only shows my videos to people who are actually engaged. And I don't want you to miss out on content that could literally change your life. This community is growing, and we're building something special here. A place where we can be honest about how hard relationships are, while also believing they're worth the effort. Join us. Your future self will thank you.